Today, you're going to learn exactly how to gear your character in Guild Wars 2. I've played Guild Wars 2 for 11 years and one of my favorite features is the lack of gear grind. The gear I got back in 2012 is just as good now as it was back then. But despite how convenient this is in the long term, getting your first set of gear as a new player can seem overwhelming. There's dozens of different stat types, multiple tiers of gear, and so many different ways to obtain the gear that you need. So today I'm taking my 11 years of experience and breaking down exactly how you should be gearing up your characters. Let's dive in. Welcome back, friends. Before we delve headfirst into raids, strikes, fractals, or world versus world in Guild Wars 2, you're gonna make your life so much easier if you start off on the right foot with a good set of gear. But there are so many ways to gear your first character in Guild Wars 2, it can be hard to know exactly where to start. There's collections that reward you with gear, countless different vendors that will sell you what you need, and that doesn't even touch on crafting. The good news is, once you gear your first character, it becomes so much easier to gear your second, your fourth, or in my case, my 23rd. So by the end of today's video, you're going to know exactly how to efficiently gear your character and be ready to dive straight into everything Guild Wars 2's endgame has to offer. But before we start, let's dial in the types of gear you actually need to care about. When it comes to gear, they're not all created equal. There are 7 different levels of rarity, from basic all the way up to legendary. But once you reach level 80, however, we really only care about the last 3. That being exotic, ascended, and legendary. Ascended and legendary have exactly the same stats. It's just that legendary has a whole bunch of quality of life baked in. You can swap stats anytime while you're out of combat, you can remove upgrades freely, you don't need to consume transmutation charges whenever you swap skins, and you can use the legendary item on multiple characters at the same time. Legendary gear is one of the pillars of endgame goals, with everyone deep down wanting every single piece of their gear to be legendary, so you never have to think about gear again.
Everybody stay calm! What's the procedure, everyone? What's the procedure? Stay calm!
There's no stat increase over Ascended though, so it's all about that quality of life. So then when it comes to getting your first proper set of gear, you only need to worry about exotic and ascended gear. In terms of the difference between exotic and ascended gear, exotic gear has slightly lower stats than ascended. It can only be used on a single character, with the trade-off being it's typically much easier and cheaper to obtain. You can even purchase a full set of exotic gear off the trading post if you have enough gold. Ascended gear, however, is going to give you the best in-slot stats. Ascended gear is also account bound, so you can swap it between characters whenever you want. You also have infusion slots, so you can customize your armor with extra stats and agony resistance, so you can do higher and higher levels of Fractals of the Mist. If you want a breakdown on why you should be doing Fractals, check out my previous video here. For all these extra benefits, the trade-off is that it is much harder to obtain, and it can't be bought straight from the trading post. At the end of the day, you want to keep working towards ascended gear, but with a full set of exotic gear, you're totally ready to jump into most of Guild Wars 2's endgame. Now, before we delve too deep into gearing our character, you can save yourself a whole lot of time and gold by doing some planning beforehand. If you don't, you could find yourself with the wrong set of gear, and you'll need to start again from scratch, which is a big oof. So before you dive in and drop fat stacks of gold on the wrong gear, let's figure out what build you want to play. As a quick rule of thumb, when thinking about gear, there are a few types of builds that we need to worry about. First up, we have power DPS, which will typically use Berserkers and Assassins gear. These are core stats available in the base game and so are relatively easy to obtain. A quick sidebar, a power DPS build is going to be by far the easiest and cheapest to gear up quickly, with everything you need being available cheaply on the trading post. So if you want a recommendation, start here. It'll be much easier to gear up your next build once you have this one under your belt. But if you want something else, let's crack on. On the flip side, we have condition damage DPS, which will typically use Viper's gear. This stat type is exclusive to Heart of Thorns, so you will need that expansion if you want to play most condition builds effectively. We also have power boon support builds. Nowadays, these types of builds will mostly use Berserker's gear, but you can slot in some Diviner's gear if you need some extra boon duration. For Diviner's gear, we're going to need Path of Fire. For our condition boon support builds, you'll typically be using Ritualist stats, which is an End of Dragons exclusive stat combination. If you're so inclined to carry your team on your broad, muscular shoulders, then you may be interested in playing a healer. For these builds, you're typically going to want Harrier's gear, which is exclusive to Path of Fire. Some alternatives though that will make you more survivable, with the trade-off being you're probably going to have to tank in raids, are Minstrels from Heart of Thorns and Givers from the core game. Once you know roughly what kind of build you want to play, check out some of these websites to find a build that suits you. We have Snowcrows, Hardstuck, Meta Battle, Guild Wars 2 Mist, Guild Gen, and your favorite Guild Wars 2 YouTuber. Any build guide or worth its salt that you find out there is going to have the exact type of gear you're going to be aiming for your build. So now that you know what kind of build you want to play and what gear you need, we can properly start gearing your character. Even though you can buy exotic trinkets straight from the trading post, I typically recommend skipping these and going straight to Ascended. Ascended trinkets give you the biggest stat boost compared to exotic gear out of all of your gear slots, with a juicy 9% extra stats. They can also be purchased incredibly cheaply from vendors in the Living World episodes, so no gold required. I will flag that some of these trinkets have the unique quality, meaning that you can't equip two of the exact same trinket. This is the case more often than not, but you can get around this by infusing or attuning one, but I recommend just having different ones altogether. Outside of Living World episodes, you can get some Berserker rings very cheaply from Fractals of the Mist, with them costing 10 pristine Fractal Relics each. This will be the Crystalline Band or the Red Ring of Death. You can easily get these just by doing a few days of the Tier 1 Fractal Dailies or 1 day of the Tier 4 Fractal Dailies if you're so inclined. You also have the option of getting an amulet for Laurels. Nowadays, this conversion isn't necessarily the cheapest, but it is there if you prefer. Another option for trinkets, although typically on the pricier side, are the Mist trinkets. These are stat selectable, so you can select any stats available in the game. They are non-unique, so you can equip two of them at the same time, but also their stats can be reset with a Mist capacitor if you ever need to significantly change up your build. These can be purchased with currencies from Fractals, PvP, and World vs. World. Now, my preferred way of getting stat selectable trinkets will be from Living World Season 3, 4, and Icebrood Saga. All episodes of Living World Season 3 and 4 will give you access to Ascended trinkets, with all but those obtained from the episodes Long Live the Lich and All of Nothing being stat selectable. The ones you'll want to focus on for gearing up though will be Season 3, A Crack in the Ice. This will give you access to an accessory, backpack, and a ring, and you'll purchase these by exchanging Winterberries and Unbound Magic. The key thing with this episode is that the Winterberry nodes can be gathered every single day on different characters. So the more characters you have, the quicker you can farm these. With a handful of characters or a couple days, it will not take you long to get all the Winterberries you need to purchase Ascended trinkets. This is typically going to be your fastest way. For the last episode of Season 4, War Eternal, you're going to get access to an accessory, an amulet, and a ring. Here you'll purchase these by trading Mistborn modes and Volatile Magic. To get these, you can either do the meta event, gather nodes, or open chests around the map. This is a very profitable meta to do anyway, so this, in the grand scheme of things, is a win-win. For Icebrood Saga, the two episodes Whisper in the Dark and Shadow in the Ice will give you access to an amulet and a ring. These only cost Eternal Ice Shards and Karma, so these are exceptionally cheap, but you will need to complete 2 collections, the Hunger and Idolatry, to unlock this vendor. Eternal Ice Shards can be farmed incredibly easily by doing map meta events across Bureau Marches, as well as Icebrood Saga strike missions. These are very good to do for gold and blue profit shards, which can be used to purchase additional Ascended gear. So 100% take the time, do your Icebrood Saga strike missions. These are also relatively easy, so they are good entry-level group content for newer players. Another Living World episode to take note of is Season 3, Episode 1, Out of the Shadows, which will give you access to an amulet, a ring, and a backpack that can be stat swapped by using a Bloodstone capacitor, similar to the Mist trinkets that I mentioned previously. This can be bought incredibly cheaply for 100 Unbound Magic. An important thing to touch on very quickly are the Season of the Dragons achievements. These are incredibly easy achievements that are just tied to completing the Living World episodes. as well as doing some gathering and a couple events on each map. By completing these achievements, you're going to get access to huge amounts of the map currency that you will need to purchase Ascended Trinkets with. So if you don't feel like gathering up all the map currency manually, these achievements are going to be your best shout. As a rough estimate, within about an hour of playtime, you should be able to complete tier 3 of each of these Return to achievements, which will reward you with 250 of the map currency, which is enough to exchange for several trinkets. And if you complete all of these Season of the Dragons achievements, you're going to get a free legendary amulet, which will mean you never have to buy Ascended amulets ever again on your account. I always recommend that new players keep working their way through the story to get access to all the new maps, all the mastery points they need, but on top of that, being rewarded with a free legendary amulet is insane value. As a new player, this should be on your priority list. Now for our weapons, I like to start with exotic and then replace with Ascended weapons as soon as they become available. If you want to access some exotic stat selectable weapons, you do have the option of purchasing the Iron Legion weapons from the trading post. These will cost you a couple gold each, but they are only available in a staff, pistol, greatsword, rifle, and sword. But if you need a stat selectable one of these, this is a good shout. Only recently added to the game in September of 2023, which completely revolutionizes gearing, is the unified vendor system in World vs. World. By talking to this vendor, you are going to be able to purchase stat selectable weapons, armor, and trinkets very cheaply using only some gold and badges of honor. So if you have played a bit of World vs. World and have some badges of honor set aside, this is an incredibly cheap way, and dare I say the best way to get stat selectable exotic weapons. You can fully gear your character just from this vendor, but if you're a new player, you may not have all the currency that's required. So let's explore some other options. For Berserker's gear, you can typically purchase this straight from the trading post very cheaply. To purchase your Berserker weapons as cheaply as possible, make sure you use the filters on the trading post. Here we can search for weapons that have power, precision, ferocity, and a level 80 and exotic. From here we can sort the price from low to high and get some amazing deals. Right here we can see I found an exotic Berserker's axe that even has a superior sigil force, which is going to be ideal, and that's available for only 2 gold, 20 silver on the trading post. For a piece of gear that can last you a long time, this is a great deal. You can repeat this process for any weapon that you need, and if you're using Berserker's gear, this is a very efficient way to do it. You can also get exotic Berserker's weapons just by unlocking specific elite specializations. Here you could get a free exotic greatsword by unlocking Reaper, shield from Chronomancer, sword from Hollowsmith, rifle from Deadeye, hammer from Scrapper, and longbow from the Dragon Hunter. If you have access to these elite specializations, this is just free real estate. Viper's gear is typically a bit more expensive to obtain than Berserker's gear. One option is to purchase Abomination weapons directly from the trading post. Some of these are relatively cheap, while others are more on the expensive side. These also drop from Secrets of the Obscure Strikes or from Convergences. We can also access some Viper's weapons from our elite specialization collections. Here we could get a Viper's axe from unlocking Firebrand, a dagger from Soul Beast, shortbow from Renegade, sword from Weaver, and torch from the Scourge. However, if you're planning to upgrade to Ascended weapons relatively soon, then dropping the gold on an exotic Viper's weapon may not be the best use of your gold. If this is the case for you, I'd recommend buying some exotic Carrion's gear from the trading post. We use the filters the same way that we did for Berserker's gear, and we can purchase Carrion gear for very cheap. You will have a slight DPS loss, but the gold trade-off may be worth it while you wait for Ascended gear. As a side note, I do not recommend buying any of the Viper's Pearl weapons from the trading post. If you have excess gold to spare, feel free, but these are not a fantastic deal. For Diviner's gear, it is relatively expensive to buy exotic gear straight off the trading post. In this case, I'd recommend that you wait for Ascended gear and use Berserker's gear in the meantime. You can always use a Sigil of Concentration for the extra boon duration if you need. Again, if you don't care about the gold, you can buy it straight from the trading post. Like Vipers and Diviners, for Rituals gear, you can purchase the Shadow Serpent weapons directly from the trading post, although these are on the pricier side. A cheaper option is typically going to be purchasing the Luxon Hunter's weapon cache from the trading post. This is more on the affordable side, and you can pick any weapon you want. No underwater weapons though, so if that's what you're holding out for, well, sorry. Similar with Vipers, to save gold, you can replace this with carrion weapons and maybe a concentration sigil and some extra boon duration food while you wait for an ascended weapon. Not ideal, but it is a significant gold saving. For Harrier's gear, you can craft mordant weapons. This is a little bit on the expensive side. You could also buy or craft magized pearl weapons. These will be a significant cost saving, and you can use a sigil of concentration and extra boon duration food to make up some of the difference. If you want exotic givers weapons, just buy them directly from the trading post. You're looking for candy cane weapons of concentration. These will have a concentration sigil that will come pre-slotted, which is very nice. For minstrel weapons, I do not recommend buying these in the trading post. They are way too expensive. Simply use the much cheaper givers weapons. Now, if you want to make the jump to ascended weapons, a very good option is to complete the Knight of the Thorn side quest, which becomes available after you complete the Heart of Thorn story. This can be done one time on every character, and you can get an incredibly cheap greatsword, sword, shield, scepter, or dagger that will be ascended and stat selectable. We also have the elite specialization collections if you need the specific weapon that your elite specialization uses. These will have a limited stat selection, but you can stat swap them in the Mystic Forge. This will use 5 globs of ectoplasm, an anthology of heroes which you'll purchase for spirit shards, an inscription or insignia of the stat type you're wanting to swap your weapon to, and the weapon you want to stat swap. You can use this to stat swap any piece of ascended weapons and armor, so make sure you memorize it. Personally, I'd avoid the Heart of Thorn's elite specialization weapon collections unless you really like the skin. The collection for the ascended version of your weapon requires a mystic weapon, which really inflates the cost. The Path of Fire and End of Dragons collections are good value though. A very cheap option is to get an ascended weapon chest from the Wizard's Vault. Here you can purchase a single weapon chest for 600 Astral Acclaim, which is incredibly cheap. You can only do this once per Wizard's Vault cycle though, but still I'd highly recommend you do this. And if these methods fail, you can also craft them. You can either craft the weapons directly, make sure you purchase the recipes you need, or you can craft Grandmaster marks to exchange at specific vendors. Just make sure that you remember that some of these materials are time gated and can only be crafted once per day. It's good to get in the habit of crafting these every day. As a new player, you're probably going to need them later, and future you will thank you. My personal favorite way of obtaining ascended weapons in the long term is by using blue profit shards that you get from doing strike missions from Icebrood Saga or End of Dragons. You can also convert the green profit shards you get from the Secrets of the Obscure strike missions into blue shards. For either 250 or 500 of the blue profit shards plus some gold, you can purchase a stat selectable weapon of your choice. The return to the Eye of the North achievements from Season of the Dragons will also give you a huge amount of profit shards as well, so this can get you well on your way to an ascended weapon. If you are keen and not afraid to jump into some raids are also a great way to get ascended weapons. Here you can exchange magnetite shards and some gold for an ascended weapon of your choice. The individual raid bosses also have a good chance of dropping ascended weapons, and any of the minis that drop from raids you can convert to extra magnetite shards as well. I raid a decent amount and I have multiple of the ascended weapons that drop from raids just lying around taking up space in my bank. If you're keen and have a decent build set up with at least exotic gear, just watch a guide on a particular raid boss and jump on in. You also have the Emboldened mode for raids, which will occur on one wing each week with it cycling through each of the 7 raid wings. Here your character gets stat buffs by default, which makes the raid significantly easier, and every time you wipe on a boss, this stat increase goes up further and further, making it easier and easier each time. If you're a new player, jumping into the Emboldened raid wing each week is a very good way to get introduced to raids. You can also check out my stream on Twitch where I regularly take newer people through raids, and this is one of the ways that I love to gear my characters as a more experienced player. Now that we have our weapons taken care of, it's time to focus on our sigils. Make sure you reference whichever place you got your build to see what sigils are required. For a rule of thumb though, for power damage builds you're typically going to want Sigil of Force, Impact, Air, or Accuracy. For condition damage builds there's a bit more variety here, with common ones being Sigil of Bursting, Torment, Earth, Doom, Smoldering, Agony, Malice, and Geomancy. For your offensive boon supports, your condition damage or power damage boon DPS, they'll typically take the same sigils as their DPS build, but they can take Sigil of Concentration for a bit of extra boon duration to make their life easier. Your healers will typically take Sigil of Transference, Concentration, Water, or Renewal. Whenever you're gearing your character, do not forget sigils. They're an incredibly important part of your build, and all the ones that I've mentioned here can just be bought off the trading post. Some of them are cheaper than others though, but don't forget them. Now armor is your lowest priority in terms of upgrading from exotic to ascended, as it represents the smallest overall increase to your stats and damage. Work on your trinkets and weapons first, unless you get some cheeky armor drops. For raids, strikes, and world versus world, exotic armor is totally fine. Once you get to higher tier fractals though, then you need more slots for agony resistance. In that case, then you're going to want to get yourself some ascended armor so you can keep climbing the fractal levels. For some easy to obtain exotic armor, you can purchase the Ice Golem's Maw headpiece directly from the trading post, which will give you a stat selectable headpiece of your choosing. You can get the shoulders of the Ebon Vanguard choice chest from the trading post, which will give you stat selectable shoulders. These are relatively affordable and I quite like to purchase these. The next best place for stat selectable armor in PvE is going to be bladed armor from Verdant Brink, the first map in the Heart of Thorns expansion. The headpiece will drop from the story step the jungle provides, gloves can drop from airship cargo chests, and the chest piece can drop from boss chests, with a choice of any armor piece when you complete tier 4 of the nighttime meta. Just check the LFG, or you can also get one from completing the Heart of Maguma reward track in World vs World or PvP. The rest you can purchase from the airship's parts vendor at the start of the map. Another option is the Warlord's armor boxes, which you get from completing PvP League reward tiers and the bronze World vs World skirmish reward track. Like I mentioned with the weapons, you can also purchase stat selectable armor from the unified vendor system in World vs World. Provided you have the badges of honor, this is by far the cheapest and easiest way to get stat selectable exotic armor, so consider playing some World vs World for your gearing needs. There are other options for stat selectable gear that drops when you complete certain achievements or story steps. However, these are usually one time only or tedious to do on each character every time you need a new piece of gear. The ones that I've mentioned previously, I consider the best ways to reliably get stat selectable armor. If you would like some exotic Berserker's gear, you can just purchase named armor directly from the trading post. You're looking for level 80 exotic gear from the Zed, Nika, and Devonna's sets. These will cover you for each weight class. There's also dungeon armor from Citadel of Flame, Crucible of Eternity, and the Ruined City of Arar. This doesn't cost any gold, just the dungeon currency Tales of Dungeon Delving. There's also temple armor you can buy from Keeper Jonez for karma only, so it's basically free. It's important to note that this armor is not salvageable, so any upgrades you place in there are lost to time. So maybe don't put your expensive Dragon Hunter or Scholar runes in there. If you want a replacement, you can search for runes, sort by price, and find the least bad thing that you can. For Diviner's armor, you can get Mist Shard armor for completing achievements. In the War Eternal Living World episode, I wouldn't recommend buying Diviner's armor from the trading post. It's a tad overpriced. For the other stat types, Vipers, Ritualist, Harriers, Minstrels, and Givers, it's way more cost effective to just grab some stat selectable armor like we covered earlier. You can buy armor with these stats straight off the trading post, but you'll be well overpaying, especially for something that is just going to be replaced with ascended gear shortly. If you're struggling and want some cheaper alternatives though, you can use Carrion for Vipers and Ritualists with some extra boon duration from runes, sigils, and food as needed, and Magi's is a decent replacement for Harrier, Minstrel, and Givers. Just replace these budget alternatives as soon as you are able. To make the jump to ascended armor, you can get 3 ascended armor chests from the Wizard's Vault for 400 Astral Acclaim each, and like with ascended weapons, you can exchange Blue Prophet shards from the Icebrew Saga or End of Dragon Strike missions for stat selectable armor of your choosing. The exact same also applies for raids with Magnetite shards. We'll also touch on fractals as a really good way to get ascended armor drops. If you start off with ascended trinkets and weapons, you're going to have access to enough agony resistance to get you through a good number of the fractal levels. And as you climb your way up the fractal tiers, you're probably going to get several armor drops along the way. You can simply take these armor drops that you get, stat swap them in the Mystic Forge, and you're good to go. And once again, if all these methods fail, you can simply craft whatever else you need. Another thing I'll touch on is the Envoy armor collections for raids. These two collections take you through the process of getting your precursor armor for the legendary armor you get from raids. Now there's 2 collections, Envoy Armor 1 and Envoy Armor 2, and each one you complete will give you a free set of ascended armor. The first set you get from Envoy Armor 1, you can pick any weight class you want, this will be all 6 pieces of armor, and it's only once you get the chest of refined Envoy armor from the Envoy Armor 2 collection that you actually need to pick the weight class you want to get legendary armor for. But with this in mind, simply doing these 2 collections rewards you with 2 sets of armor, which is worth an immense amount of gold. It's also worth considering that these 2 collections only require you to complete raid wings 1 through 4, which are 4 of the easier raid wings in Guild Wars 2. And this is an incredibly effective way to gear up multiple classes. It is a stepping stone towards legendary armor, so you'll never need to buy armor for that weight class again across any of your characters, and it's how I geared up my Necromancer and Revenant in full Ascended armor on my EU alt account. And like I mentioned before, if you want to get into raids, check out the Emboldened wings for each week, and once again with armor it is generally okay to start with exotic and gradually work your way towards Ascended. And just switch out your exotic armor for any Ascended drops that you get and use your currencies to buy the rest of what you need. All else fails, just craft. Like with Sigils, we also need to consider the runes that we put in our gear. Don't neglect them, they are a huge part of your build. For power DPS classes, you're typically going to be looking for Rune of the Scholar, Rune of the Dragon Hunter, and Rune of Infiltration. Each of these can either be crafted or bought from the trading post. I personally just tend to buy them straight from the trading post. For conditioned DPS, the most common rune is Rune of the Trapper, but this is account bound, so you can't buy it from the trading post, so you will need to craft it. So make sure you have either Armorsmith, Leatherworker, or Tailor level to at least 400 to be able to craft it. If you need help leveling your crafting disciplines, check out gw2crafts.net for the most efficient way to level your crafting. If you plug in your Guild Wars 2 API key, you can also have it check what materials you currently have so you can utilize what you have on hand. For your offensive support builds, you'll typically just take the same runes that your regular DPS builds will use. For your healer classes, you'll typically take Rune of the Monk, which you'll obtain from the Ascalonian Catacomb section of the Dungeon Merchant. You will need Tales of Dungeon Delving for this, but these are typically your best in slot runes for healers. Some other alternatives are Rune of the Water, which you can buy straight from the trading post. This will give you extra boon duration instead of healing power. They are a bit pricey though. A nice cheap option I personally use is Rune of Rebirth, which will grant you a bit more toughness compared to Rune of the Monk, but is available incredibly cheaply on the trading post. Just pick whichever fits your budget. Now, in terms of relics, I'll touch on the core options that we really need to worry about. For your power builds, you'll typically take Relic of the Thief or Relic of Fireworks. These just give you flat damage increases depending on different criteria, and which one's better changes from build to build. For your condition damage builds, you'll typically be taking Relic of the Fractal, which you'll obtain from this merchant in the Wizard's Tower in the Secrets of the Obscure expansion. If you can't access this one yet, Relic of the Aristocracy is a decent alternative. For your healer builds, you'll usually take Relic of the Monk. All of these outside of Relic of the Fractal, you can just buy from the trading post or craft them. So just check on Guild Wars 2 efficiency whether it's cheaper to craft them or buy them, but usually the prices are so close that it doesn't really matter in the cosmic scheme of things. At some point in the gearing process, you're going to need to spend some gold, and if you're struggling to make some extra gold so you can gear your characters even faster, check out my guide on the secret to easily making gold in Guild Wars 2. I hope you enjoyed today's video. Now you have everything you need to go out, gear your characters, and dive into everything Guild Wars 2 has to offer. And with that, I'll catch you all next time. Cheers.